you've got something that's kind of making a lot of headlines here, and it gives us a chance to enter kind of nerd world. And we've talked about Star Trek before, but I don't know that we've hit Marvel yet with AI. So have at it.
Yes. So Marvel Studios has a little bit of a controversy on their hands with their latest piece of media that they're releasing. So for those of you who might not be up to date on the latest Marvel media, they have a new series that is coming out right now called Secret Invasion. It's a little bit unique in the Marvel universe in that it doesn't have any superheroes. It's a fairly grounded show that focuses on Samuel Jackson's character Nick Fury. And the short version of the premise is that there is an alien race that are shapeshifters that can turn into basically whatever kind of humanoid.
No superheroes, but aliens, which I don't know. That's kind of if we're going to have aliens, it's nice to have a few superheroes running around. But anyhow, so
yeah. It's a really interesting premise. And basically it's just this whole spy thriller of secret agent Nick Fury trying to like figure out like who's an alien, who's not, and trying to like uncover the conspiracy and things like that. And so I really like the show. The first episode, as of when we were recording this, came out just last week. So I think the show is really cool. But what has gotten them into some controversy and what makes it relevant for this podcast is that for the opening credits sequence, so there's a little bit of like the show content at the beginning, and then there's an opening credits crawl where they have the lead actors and all of that. They have it animated in a really unique style, and the animation was actually done and created using AI tools. Marvel contracted a VFX company called Method Studios to do it. And essentially, they used some form of what some might be familiar with called Stable Diffusion to be able to do it, where essentially they gave the AI a prompt of like an image, and then they gave it instructions on what style they wanted that image to be re-rendered in and what they wanted the animation to look like. So the whole animation is basically just a bunch of sort of like abstract art pieces that almost look hand-drawn, kind of changing and morphing, which kind of fits with the theme of the show of things that look human, not necessarily being human. And it's the visual style, I think, is at least really neat looking, but you can definitely tell that it's AI if you watch the clip of it, because it's sort of got that like jittery look to it where like a bunch of the image elements kind of shift around. And one of the images they have where like half of Samuel Jackson's face in this style is kind of morphing into an alien, but then like a second nose shows up on the side of his face towards the end of it for no particular reason, just because the AI messed up.
Sounds like the opening to a James Bond movie, actually. So.
Kind of, just a little bit more janky, frankly, but yeah. And so there's the visual style of it that's unique, but it's creating a lot of controversy, just because while AI has been used in content, like big budget content creation for quite some time, whether people realize it or not, such as de-aging actors for different roles, this is one of the most obvious uses of it. And so, first of all, before I get into some of my opinions on it, Jonathan, I'd be very curious to hear like what your opinion is of this usage of AI.
Well, if I'm correct, the controversy is over people saying that AI steals somebody's job, right? Isn't that the is that kind of the controversy?
Essentially, yes. People are upset because it's something that they believe, they are using AI as something that could like take over people's jobs, which is particularly a hot topic in the entertainment industry right now because of the writer's strike that's going on right now. And that's a major point that writers are contending with, is saying that they want to have security knowing that AI isn't going to like replace their jobs.
I'm trying to focus myself here, David. This hits a bunch of different things for me, and so for the audience, these might be some controversial topics. First of all, if I'm a writer on strike, I might think carefully about how hard I strike in a world of AI. If you're pro-union, I'm sure that's going to get on your nerves, but there's a level here of just reality when it comes to what's going on in the world. And it seems to me that if I'm a writer right now and there's a thing out there that's getting better at replacing me, the last thing I want to do is be a pain in the side of the people that pay me to do the work that maybe they're starting to think to do otherwise, right? I mean, this is reminiscent to me of some family connections in the 1980s to the steel industry, where I watched a bunch of steel workers strike to protest against cheap Japanese steel. And the steel companies' reaction to that was, we might as well shut down because our striking workers are going to be way more expensive, and we're already getting undercut, and it just got more expensive. We might as well cut our losses now. And so it seemed like an ill-advised sort of thing. But I don't know much of the intricacies of the strike. What struck me as kind of odd about this is that this appears to me about the same as somebody complaining that the actor lost a job because somebody animated something. And you would say, well, there's a bunch of animators working, but now there's not actors working. So I don't, check me on this, David. Is it Christian Bale that plays Anakin Skywalker in the terrible early movies?
No, that would be Hayden Christensen.
It was Hayden Christensen.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hayden Christensen, does he voice that character in the animated Jedi stuff?
No, he does not.
Right. And neither does Dude the Road Around the World on the motorcycle, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Ewan McGregor.
Ewan McGregor. Thanks. I knew I could count you for these things, David. That person's he's not voicing the character in the Clone Wars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So could you make the same argument and say, well, this animation came along and is using the images and the characters that were played by the actors in the live events, and now all of a sudden they don't have a job? It seems to me the same argument would be, well, you had actors and you had animators, and now they're not doing it. Instead, a bunch of programmers are doing it. And I realize AI might be eliminating some of those programmers as well. But it seems to me to be sort of a strange place to complain about in a world that already has animation. But this is me sort of skimming across the top and maybe not fully understanding the whole thing.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think there's a couple of interesting intricacies that I think could be added onto this. I've listened to a few other commentaries on the specific issue that have helped me to kind of understand a bit more of why there's so much resentment to this. I think a large portion of it, and the reason that a lot of artists are very upset about AI, is because of the fact that AI, in how it has to be trained, has to get data, has to get already existing art and things that are already out there in the world to train off of, to be able to use, to take in, and then create something new based off of it. And so a lot of artists are concerned because their art that they worked on and they created is getting basically taken and used, and without them giving permission for it to be able to have that happen, and then is suddenly being used to create something different. And essentially they're saying, like, a good part of it is what is happening a lot now in the industry is that there are animators and writers who are coming onto projects, and instead of them saying, here's like the source material for a book that we're wanting to create a show or a movie off of, write an initial script off of it, then write a second draft and third draft, and basically have a writing team take it all the way to the end. Now what's happening is that they are saying, hey, we've taken the source book, we fed it through an AI. Now here's what the AI came up with. Now you make a second draft and a third draft. And essentially how the artists are seeing it is that it's being used to pay the artists less because they don't have to put in all of the work of writing that initial draft because they're getting AI to do it.
Well, I can see where that'd be concerning. I guess I'd be more concerned if I remembered a bunch of artists and content creators and writers saying the same thing about their blue collar brethren when the same thing happened to them, right? Like, I mean, so in some sense, this is exactly what happened. So a blacksmith was in the town square, intimately connected to his community, making things one off a time, taking a hunk of metal, stick it in the fire, wanging it with a hammer until he made a horseshoe, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden a factory came along, you feed molten steel in one side, it gets poured into molds, whacked with a bunch of steam hammers. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you've got thousands of horseshoes being made, and you don't need the blacksmith in the middle. And so that's true. And there's less room for blacksmiths in today's world. It seems to me this is a bit of a a bit of a repeat of the same thing. It just is a little different now because instead of physical objects, we're talking about creativity. And I was thinking, yeah, go ahead, David. So
yeah, I was going to say, I feel like that's really the part that feels like the difference, is because it's one thing if it is just the manufacturing of an inanimate object, and to some extent, you can make the argument, for example, in like knife making, for example, there are people who do that by hand, and that is absolutely a form of artistry. And even though like there's mass-produced knives out there that are going to be fine for 99% of people, there's still a small segment of people who see that as like absolutely an art form, and I think that's absolutely correct. Whereas this is much more focused on being an art form in writing and in having like in creating art in movies and TV and things like that.
Is that entirely true though? Because there's whole industries that crank out serial westerns, how many Star Trek books are there? I mean, I know they're not popular anymore, but back in the, in the 90s and stuff like that, you could go into and I know this is super dating, and David, you might not understand all this stuff, but you could go into a Walden's Books in a mall, and there'd be an entire shelf that would have like 120 titles of Star Trek, right? And so, and in reality, what was happening is you had you had an industry and a factory turning these things out. There's multiple writers. They were working on stamp scripts, and they were basically fleshing in characters, and they're writing the pieces really fast. Bobbsey Twins were written this way back in the day. And I don't know that I'm trying to think if there's equivalencies now, in terms of, yeah, you probably have some graphic artists, graphic novel type stuff that's the same thing. But yeah, you got these serial books. And so there's a way to do that. It's mass produced, but it's clearly low quality. It's the same thing again and again. It's the same script sort of recycled. And then there's a person that comes down and sits and writes a brand new science fiction book. And that's a whole different level, and it's a whole different level of quality.
Right.
So anyhow, it seems to me that there's maybe some parallels here, that this has existed. There has been sort of factory produced creativity, but then there's always room for that person that comes along and does something new. So,
yeah. And I guess at least part of the concern, well, from one aspect, is that as of right now, no, AI is not good enough to be able to, on a high level. I don't think that Marvel would be comfortable having their next Avengers saga being completely written by AI. Right. It's just nowhere near good enough to actually be able to do that, not by a long shot. But that is a concern at some point in the future. So I think there's a part of that in people's minds. The other interesting part about the concern for artists in this industry is that, specifically in the entertainment industry, it is becoming far, far less writers and people who are in full-time paid positions, and it is becoming much, much more of a gig economy. And it has become a lot more challenging for people to make full, steady careers with benefits out of doing creative work like this, because essentially studios are figuring out ways to, instead of having work done by one full-time person, just have a few gig people who are just there on contract to be able to piece it together. And maybe the work suffers a little bit, but in the long run, it ends up being cheaper for the producers of the movie. And so as a result, a lot of the people who are pursuing these careers are having to try to essentially find gigs that are not paying them what they're worth, because they're essentially having to compete in an industry that is trying to cut corners and cut costs as much as possible. And what they're seeing is that AI is making that even more convenient for the people that are already underpaying them. And that's a lot of what the motivation is for the writer's strike, it seems like.
How much email do you want to get, David? You want to get really controversial here?
Oh, boy. Okay.
So I think that I'm enough of a capitalist, and I'm not an economist, but to think that at some level, money and where money flows is a lot of things, but it's primarily a great indicator of value. So in other words, I tell people all the time, it's great to volunteer, but if you really want to learn quickly, you need to go get paid to do something, because people won't pay you unless you're delivering value that makes that payment worthwhile. And so it's this really interesting system of sort of parsing out where value is. And so I'm going to say something that people are going to really find offensive, I think, and I'm not trying to be offensive to people, but I think if that is indeed the case, and I think that that's not some nefarious scheme, I don't think that that's like some shadowy, backroom players. I think that that's kind of it's a measurement of human nature, and it's a measurement of human desires and wants, and it's a gauge of human ability, right? So I think that it kind of, there's a fascinating story. I can't remember who wrote it. It's called I Pencil, and he talks about all the super complicated things that have to come together to make a pencil work. And so, and they do, because it's not like somebody is, if you think about this, right, you have to have, at the time this is written, you had to have rubber trees, and rubber had to be harvested and made into erasers. And you had ore melted down and made into the steel for the little band that holds the eraser in. You had trees cut down, and then they had to be shaped and cut. You have to have chemicals put together for paint. You have to have lead or graphite mined. And then all these things have to come together, and they have to be formed in this one place in a certain way. And then things getting sold, I think that time of this essay was written, it's sold for a nickel or something like that. And people are saying, can you imagine trying to do that? Like, there's hundreds of thousands of peoples across the world that are all playing a small role in this pencil that you hold in your hand that you paid less than 25 cents for. Isn't that extraordinary? And can you imagine one person trying to do that? It's a market force that brings it all together. And at some level, it's a market force that reflects value. Okay. Digression, I swear, makes sense as we kind of bring that back. If you bring that back, one of the uncomfortable realities is that the value is not in creativity, it's in distribution. That it's way harder to get entertainment to a large audience than it is to create something that's entertaining. And I feel like there's people that inherently rebel against that, but then that's the reality. And here's the cold truth that I'd say, that I work with really extraordinary people and extraordinary students, and I like to say they're extraordinary, and maybe we work with some better students, but I think that if you go into almost any community, there's a couple people there, not one or two, like probably a dozen or more, that have the physical ability to be really great, famous singers. They have the skill. I think that you can find writers that have the ability to write really great, compelling content. You have artists that can create really interesting works. And yet that is actually a pretty high supply. There's a lot of those. The trick is to be able to find somebody and be able to sing and have hundreds of thousands of people do it. The trick is, David, I'm going to ask your help again. Who's the really famous female singer that's like packing stadiums right now? Taylor Swift, right? Taylor Swift, isn't it?
Yes.
Swifties, right? Okay. I wouldn't know a Taylor Swift song if I tripped over it. Okay, right. But here's the fascinating thing. A friend of mine's family, daughters and wife, just went to a Taylor Swift concert in New Jersey. And basically, like, we were just running the numbers and the tickets and everything else. It was something like $55 million a night or something like that was the amount of stuff. Now, look, I say I wouldn't know a Taylor Swift song, but I have heard Taylor Swift sing. Here's the thing. I think I know at least a dozen people in my own personal circle that can sing as well as Taylor Swift. I don't think that she has... I think she's a phenomenal person in terms of her energy and the skill that she has to put on a show. I'm not, and don't crucify me if you're a Swift fan, I'm not saying that she doesn't have talent. I'm just saying that in terms of raw talent, I probably know half a dozen people that have at least as much talent as she does. The difference here is the ability to get that talent broadcast on a really wide stage. And so what's interesting here is that I think we have AI coming in and making something simpler. And there's people arguing that there ought to be an inherent value in creativity. I don't know. I think you could actually find creativity in a lot of places. And I don't know that it's actually as difficult to find or as exceptional as creatives think that it is. What's different is finding people who can create really good stuff and then distribute it in a way that lots of people see it, which is a slightly different thing. So I know that's not 100% AI, but I think it's good to keep in mind, because as AI comes in and eliminate some of these things, I think what you'll see is the elimination of what was ultimately fairly common talent. And so if you're out there and you're a creative, this should have been the reality for you all along, but you're going to have to be an uncommon talent to be able to make a living with that. And that is always the most job secure way to go about this. Not to combat advancing technology, not to complain about it, not to form false economic fences against it, but instead to say, here's the reality. I'm going to have to be far better than average. That's the cheapest and most guaranteed job security that I have. Does that all track, David?
Yeah, I think so. It's just incredibly challenging, like you said, to be able to have that level of talent and then be able to understand how to get yourself recognized and, like you said, distribute what you have and get your talent recognized on a level that is extraordinary. Because I mean, to an extent, that's why talent shows like America's Got Talent or American Idol are so popular, is that, you have people who have incredible amounts of talent who are suddenly able to have a large amount of recognition and distribution just by being able to come up and sing in front of a studio audience, in front of people who are like industry, like known quantities, essentially. So
we could get personal with this. I mean, I'll ask the audience to listen here. David's got a really good voice. I don't, but David does. And we pick on him for it a little bit because we're sort of jealous. But like, tell me that you listen to David on a microphone and you think he's not, and then you listen to people that are getting narration jobs and lots of other things, and David's not better than they are, or at least as good. And I would say that if you're just being straight up honest, that yeah, there's some rare talent out there, like a James Earl Jones, that just have these really unique kind of signature voices, right? But there's a whole lot of people who are getting paid a lot more money than David's getting paid to do alternative ideas, who have talent that's the same or perhaps less than David's. So the talent's there, but we'll tell you that it's blame difficult to get it distributed. Like, we really appreciate you listening to this, but we're going to be straight up honest with you and say that there's not hundreds of thousands of you, at least yet. And so finding talent wasn't the hard job. The hard job was getting the talent that was the distribution aspect of it. And that may be an important thing for us to recognize as AI is eliminating what honestly there was a high supply of anyhow, talent. But what's left is the distribution and the application. And that is where the difficulty lies. That's where a lot of the opportunity is. So for every one of these artists that's getting eliminated because, well, they had kind of okay talent, but not world-class sort of unusual talent. Keep in mind that it's, if you can hack the distribution model, that's one way to do it. Or just remember, for all those out there thinking, well, all these jobs are getting eliminated. Yes, but the major job still remains. How do you get the right stuff to the right people? And that is always where the difficulty is. And that's where the big money is, because it's difficult. So that might be just an interesting sort of perspective on reality that might help you sort of put in context some of this AI stuff.
Yeah. So kind of, at least what I'm hearing from it is that it's really just the same problem that has existed and the same challenge that has existed for people who are looking to make careers in creative industries for pretty much ever. It's a new variety and a new, just an additional layer of challenge on top of the ones that already existed.
You go back in history and every town had a really good singer. Every town had a bard. Every town had a storyteller. Every town had people that could play the fiddle and play the guitar. I mean, like, that was not unusual at all. What was unusual was the one that got in front of the king. And then they got sponsorships, and then they got paid to just produce their music. That didn't necessarily mean there weren't other people. And of course, there's genius talents. There's Beethoven's and Bach's and stuff like that. And that is a different category. But there's lots and lots of people who got paid to create art, that there was lots and lots of people just like them that could create the same art and do it just as well. It's just that one had the ear of the king and one had the sponsorship, the patronage of the rich and powerful. And that was always more difficult than the actual creativity. And I don't mean to take away from anybody's creative powers or ability. I just think that humans were made in God's image. And so by and large, we are creative. And so creativity is not rare. And I think that we've got this mixed understanding that we think that creativity is valuable because only a few people can do it. Actually, I think lots and lots of people have high creative talents and they should lean into them more. The difference is just the distribution.
Thank you so much for watching this clip of the Alternative Ideas podcast. If you want to see some more of the clips like this one, or if you want to see the full episodes where these clips come from, you can check those out here on the Alternative Ideas podcast YouTube channel.